have something to add, as well as to receive feedback from our general manager CEO. The performance evaluation form was fully developed last year. It needs only to be updated annually to reflect the performance assessment outcome ratings and corresponding point distribution of the short-term goals and associated adjusted base salary percentage increase for which the GM CEO is eligible for this year's performance period. I want to have the conversation regarding this draft to get a sense from all of you and the general manager CEO regarding the suggested update. The draft was created with input from both myself and Vice Chair Chris Guchenritter, relying heavily on the instruction and information from RKL last year about the performance evaluation tool and process. Adjusting the numbers and the evaluation form is a first attempt. And so I want to make sure that everybody is comfortable and aligned before we continue. A couple of things to note. In your board packet, you should have received also the process that was described last year with the slideshow that was prepared for the board at the time that we received this performance evaluation tool, and their suggestions and best practices. For reference, you can review the video that is available for that meeting, but most of the information is written therein. As part of the process, RKL ran the process last year as our third-party vendor, and they used the system Qualtrics that will become important later. That was how we distributed the evaluation form and where information was compiled to be presented to the committee and then to the full board after all of the directors had an opportunity to respond to this evaluation form. They will not be doing that process again this year, so we will need to internalize this. And working with our Chief People Officer, Charlene Pelegi, we will create that form in Qualtrics again, because we do have access to that. Hello, Director Chandler. Thank you for joining. For the compilation and the review of the performance feedback on this. So I'm trying to document this process as we go forward and create the roadmap for next year's committee and chair to be able to do these updates and know what benchmarks look like as the year progresses so that we avoid not having to do a full-on tackle at the end of the year, and we can have things set up on a timeline that can be moved depending on how we establish our goal setting process as we've been discussing, but also to ensure that we have everything set up, and in order to continue this forward, the adjustment parts are easier. There is more to come on this. This is just the draft of the evaluation form questions that will be used with some insight to how the point evaluations might look based on what we confirmed and affirmed as a body in January of 2025. So I believe you all have the document in front of you. It is available for public display. I'm going to open the floor to anybody who would like to speak. Just raise your hand and I will take notes scrupulously for this process. Are there any questions or discussion at this time? Director Larson.
So on the part of the document that I guess relates to the short-term goals.
Mhm.
I guess let me make sure first that I'm understanding this correctly. So we have these short-term goals, many of which, or most of which, have a specific number that needs to be achieved. Is the idea that we are going to sort of each of us rate whether or not that short-term goal or to what degree it's achieved, uh, versus just sort of setting a criteria or whereby there's a number of points provided based on um, just objectively how close the number is actually achieved?
I want to understand your question fully. It sounds like, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that you are asking whether we're going to be rating this on a yes/no process or on a scale.
Well, I see there's a scale, a section rating scale with point values from 0 to 12. And I guess, I mean, to me, if say short-term goal one is to increase light rail service availability to 96%, why would we be rating that? Why wouldn't it just automatically be a 6? Or if it was, if it fell short, why wouldn't we set a scale sort of whereby if it fell, short by a certain amount, it would be 0. If it was partially short of, there'd be some range between like whatever benchmark or sort of starting point and 96%, where it would automatically be a portion of the 6 points. And then also, if it exceeded the 96%, there would be a an automatic sort of linear or other scale where it would get more than the 6 points. I mean, I guess I'm just. It seems like if I'm understanding this correctly, we have this objective number, a quantitative number that we're basing the most of these short-term goals on, but we're still being asked we're still saying we're going to ask the directors to subjectively evaluate whether that objective number has been achieved. Am I reading this right?
Well, I am essentially using the goals that were approved by the board within the framework that was established for the review process. So yes, you are reading it correctly. This is also why I wanted to have this discussion today,
Right. Okay.
because I am working within the confines of the tool that we use to do this evaluation on goals that did not necessarily match the process on how we do the evaluation. So we need to have a conversation about how we would like to proceed here with respect to this. And really, I want to emphasize we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. We do have a performance evaluation tool that simply needs to be updated. How you would like to do that update is important, but what we did not discuss in January, as I had flagged several times for committee members, was this part of the process that also needed to be done with the goal setting, and it was ignored advice. So we need to now adjust and move forward. So do you have some
Yeah,
thoughts
yeah,
on?
what I would recommend we do for each of these short-term goals is rather than ask the board members to kind of rate whether or not they're achieved or to what degree they're achieved. I mean, I would set a basically a linear scale of achievement where we have a point below which there are 0 points awarded. So say for example, and I'm not saying these are the right numbers to use, but say for example with the short-term goal number one, the goal is to achieve 96%. If but let's say when let's say this the prior year that we had achieved 92%. So I would say one way we could do this is say, okay, well, every sort of between 92%, which was last year, and 96%, which is the goal this year, that we could allocate 6 of the points between there. So like below 92% would get 0 points, 96% would get the sort of meets expectation points, and above 96% would get sort of additional points up to whatever sort of threshold we want to use to the maximum point. And it doesn't have to be just like that, but I mean, my goal is to try to, rather than kind of subjectively evaluate whether or not these numbers are achieved and to what degree they're achieved or exceeded, we set up in advance a scale that sort of says, based on the end result, this is the number of points that are awarded, and whatever that is, and then we sort of don't we set it in advance rather than later. And I just think as a practice that makes a lot more sense. than sort of subjectively evaluating whether or not an objective goal is achieved after the fact.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Gutschnerder, your hand was up next.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to Director Larson. I mean, absolutely valid. You know, you're saying, hey, it's an objective. It's not, it shouldn't be subjective, but I think the lens I was looking at it through is, you know, we don't want to be overly prescriptive in the rating scale and kind of take all control out of individual directors' ability to assess. And so, you know, that's certainly a route we could go down. But I think there's also some benefit to letting the directors look at the information and assess how they think the agency did relative to those, because you know, it could be did not meet objective, you know, did not meet the hard numbers, but there could be very valid reasons. And, you know, even if we came up very, very short of those numbers and a director might think, well, that's a 3 and another might think that's a 0. And I think that's okay. So just wanted to share that thought.
Can I respond?
It's fine by me.
Uh, yeah, I mean, I just think that it sort of defeats the whole purpose to have objective measures if we can basically just decide later whether or not they're actually going to be applied. I mean, I think that can kind of, I mean, I think that makes the incentive or the meaningfulness of these measures a lot less significant for the CEO GM, as that person doesn't really know what's going to happen if they're achieved or not achieved. And I think that the purpose of objective measures is to give clarity and to set a concrete goal. I mean, we do have the whole other 50% of this performance evaluation is based on subjective measures, sort of determined by the board. And certainly, if the goal falls short and there's still an opportunity within the performance evaluation to uh, apply subjective measures. And even further than that, I mean, if there were circumstances that arose, I guess, like, if we had another sort of COVID type situation, I mean, there's really nothing stopping us from revising the entire arrangement based on, special circumstances or whatnot. But to me, it seems like we have a large subjective portion already, and it makes a lot more sense to do as much as we can to try to set objective measures and not, and in both directions to say, like, look, if the performance overachieved, and it doesn't really, I mean, I'm not sure how much it matters for this year, but I mean, if there is overachievement, it should not be sort of the subjective board's decision to decide whether or not whatever reward might be associated with that overachievement is really deserved. I mean, if it was achieved, it should be rewarded as we said we would, and and vice versa. If it was not achieved, the discount versus the kind of at plan reward should be applied objectively as well. And I think I really just think that's just best practice for any kind of incentive, uh, sort of any kind of evaluation or incentive compensation system, is to do as much as you can to make it so that the objective measures are what's driving that portion of the evaluation.
All right, thank you. Director Nicholson, your hand is raised. You're recognized.
Yes, thank you. Um, I understand it, significantly where Director Larson is coming from on this one, but I actually happen to agree with Director Gutenritter, which is to say that I think that, first off, each of these goals has a different type of sliding scale to them. For some of them, does not meet expectations, it would, for me at least, be a much lower benchmark and perhaps a more curved benchmark than something that might be more linear, where if you miss it by 1%, it goes down by 1%. If you miss it by 2%, so I think first off, it's not that subjective, but that it requires significant amounts of objective analysis if we're going to try to create a reasonable benchmark. The second thing I would say is that I think some of these goals were more aggressive than other ones. And a recognition that in some cases the goal first off, if you look at, for example, the Vision Zero goal, it's very hard to exceed expectations on something that is basically designed as a binary. So, I'm not even sure how with that one you could exceed expectations if it's designed as a you shall do this, did you do it, did you not? And I think for some of them, the goal was set as very much an industry leading number as opposed to a middle of the pack number. And so I feel like recognizing it would take a lot of time to effectively set benchmarks for these. And to Chair Guzman's point, we didn't do that when we set these goals. And it makes a lot of sense if you're gonna hold people to an objective standard to set the sliding scale, to set the rubric at the same time that you set the goal and vote on them at the same time. So I think that, recognizing where you're coming from, Director Larson, I think given the changes we make and the manner in which we made them, it is more reasonable for us to make those decisions using a rubric the way that it's been laid out in this case, and then to have discussions about sort of how we feel those goals could be analyzed and to frame that for ourselves in making those evaluations. We shouldn't be doing it just from the oh, we're all going to come up with numbers and sort of we should be having a reasonable discussion about how do we feel about each of these goals and what constitutes what they are. But I think that at the end of the day, having the framework the way we've laid it out is the more thoughtful thing to do.
Thank you, Director Nicholson. I am simply going to say this. What I don't want to do is have a Charlie Brown Lucy moment. We need to set this up and be clear about it, but we don't want to move the goalpost. We don't want to pull the ball at the last minute. And we do need to get to consensus around how we proceed. At this point, I would invite the General Manager CEO to add any comments you might have, having heard the previous discussion. And we have talked briefly about this process. She has also been aware of what's going on along with you with this draft. And so I would like to get your input and feedback. This is your review process, and this is the time that we should be discussing with you as well, if this is suitable, and if you find it acceptable, or if there's something that you can flag that we might need to address.
Thank you very much, Committee Chair Guzman. Greetings all. Deborah Johnson, General Manager and CEO. Thank you for the opportunity to offer my opinion relative to this discussion. A couple of things. As we talk about some of the goals that are outlined here, I'm in agreement relative to having something that doesn't limit us, but keeping in mind when we're talking about key performance indicators that are very finite relative to service delivery, there's not going to be too much wiggle room. The subjective aspect of it is exactly what was said by Vice Chair Gutenritter and Secretary Nicholson relative to knowing whether or not we're achieving reliability at 96%. Those are metrics you can look at, but then there could be extenuating circumstances. If in fact you had a tanker truck that basically impeded the embedded track and the catenary wires fell, I have no control over the ability to achieve service reliability when that has now become some catastrophic zone. So keeping that in mind, I think if anything, it's prudent to ensure that there is some flexibility because the subjective aspect comes in. Did I, with the leadership of this agency and folks that comprise the team that have responsibility for day-to-day light rail service delivery, was everything done to the best of our ability to minimize or mitigate the impacts that were caused by an external factor? That's how performance reviews are done here within this organization with all non-represented staff. So it's not just black and white. In certain circumstances, there could be shades of gray. Director Larson, no, it was Secretary Nicholson talked about the Vision Zero goal as well. Either you did it or you didn't, but there's a lot less wiggle room relative to what that is when you keep in mind that I've been charged with aiming to decrease fatalities when in fact with Dr. Cox serving as the MPO, that planning entity has not been able to achieve any type of decrease in fatality goals for the period in which they've been in existence with the creation of Vision Zero. So thinking about those aspects, that has to be taken into consideration. And I think there is a rubric that will provide some guidance relative to reviewing quick tip sheets. And not to mention when we go forward with this, and I agree we can't move the goalposts. That's constantly happened throughout the tenure of my career here at the Regional Transportation District. It's more or less looking at where we're going, because when I provide you with updates in our quarterly check-ins, I would appreciate this being established, because that will be an unfair advantage to you all recognizing where we are and we haven't established what the scoring rubrics are going forward. So that's what I have at this juncture. Committee Chair Guzman, thank you for the opportunity just to share that. But in closing, really quickly, I want you to know that this is a bilateral process. I'm willing to lean in and ensure that you all have what you need to assess the performance, because the short-term goals are 50% of my goal. And keeping in mind that if I'm not doing my day-to-day job and I'm not achieving the goals, then we have an opportunity to seek out somebody that can meet the needs of this organization for the betterment of the constituency served. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam CEO. Just a quick fact check as well. Legal Counsel Snyder, General Counsel Snyder, excuse me. Are you on? Hi, good morning.
Mr. Chair. Yes, I'm on.
So the framework and the performance evaluation are part of the current amended contract. Is that correct?
Yes,
They're
that's
defined
correct.
in there. And so what we also want to be very careful of is that we are contractually bound to this process, and we want to make sure that we proceed forward with what we can change and should change based on the current performance year, correct?
Yes, that's correct. I think it's important to make sure that we're all using the term framework in the same way. So the framework, when I use that term, I'm talking about the framework that's established in the contract that establishes the values, the job description, and the short-term goals are the criteria, are the components of the assessment. And then the contract also speaks to the board's ability to make adjustments on an annual basis as to the relative points for those different components, that point distribution, as well as tying that point distribution to any percentage of increase in the adjusted base salary for which the GM and CEO is eligible each year.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. I'm going to call names. Sorry. Director Geisinger, Director Catlin, you have not had a chance yet to speak. I would invite you to make any comments before I return to the directors who've already spoken at this time.
Thank you, Chair Guzman. I think that the important thing in terms of how we move this forward, these are objective goals, and as I think Secretary Nicholson said, they are, have set at industry-leading numbers. So I agree with Ms. Johnson that we need to be thinking about some flexibility towards achieving the goal, and issues that may come up that get in the way. That would be my main concern.
Thank you. Director Catlin.
Yes, thank you, Chair Guzman. I guess I would caution this group to not overcomplicate this process. And I also agree with GM CEO Johnson that sometimes there are things outside of her control that have to be factored into an evaluation. So I would just say let's establish it, but let's not overcomplicate it at this point.
Okay, thank you. There are other directors that joined us today. So Chair Bouquet, Director Chandler, Director O'Keefe was on, but it looks like he has dropped off. Do either of you have anything to add to the conversation at this point? I would invite you.
Thank you, Chairman Guzman. I agree with Director Catlin. This does not need to be a complicated proposition. It should be a thorough proposition, and I appreciate the lively discussion, but I also don't think it needs to be complicated. Transportation is complicated in its nature because there are so many external factors that need to be taken into account. But I think the easier it is for the not only for the directors to come up with a solution, but also for the public to understand how we are evaluating the CEO is very important. Transparency really is where I think we need to err on. So the less complicated, the better. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you. Board Chair Bouquet.
Yes, thank you very much, Committee Chair. I think it's been a very valuable discussion so far. I think there has been some valuable points that have been brought up, that I wasn't actually considering. But again, just piggybacking off of what the other two directors have said, I think that's the message I'm hearing is, kind of let's keep it simple, keep it to that, follow within the specific framework. But I think it's been a meaningful discussion. And I think there's a lot of points that we could, take going into the future. So not much to add on, but I'm going to keep listening on. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Director Larson, your hand is raised.
I'd just like to respond mainly to Director Nicholson's comments. I don't think we necessarily, if we were to set the goals, it doesn't necessarily have to be a linear scale in terms of how we evaluate sort of the performance against the goal. So for example, if it was 96% reliability, you could set it so that at 95% you get 90% of the points, or and at 94% you get 80%. I mean, you can kind of set it however you want to based on what the goal was that was sent, and the judgment we make about how difficult it might be to hit that goal, or how easy. You can make it fall off quite a bit if you wanted to. If it falls below, you could go at 95%, it could get only 25% of the reward. I mean, I think you can build the scaling around these concerns. And I understand that we're now well into the performance period and haven't set this at all, and it seems kind of late at this point. I accept that, but I do think that is the way to do this. You base you set up objective scaling and objective predetermined before the year starts ways that you are planning to evaluate the performance against these objective goals, with what the over and under achievement means and how it works. I think that is the correct way to do it. And the other part of it, I guess I would say, there in any business, in any organization, there's always unforeseen circumstances that occur. with everything. And I think sometimes those things are so substantial that you do have to reset goals. But at the same time, I think it's every management team's job to try to achieve the goals, knowing there will be unforeseen circumstances that occur. So if your goal is to achieve 96%, as a management team, I would say, well, our goal is going to be to achieve 90, 97%, knowing that way, if something happens that, is out of my control that prevents me from achieving 97%, or our management team from achieving 97%, we will still have a cushion in there, a buffer, so that we can still achieve the goal. And I think that's always something, you can't set up the expectation that there's always going to be reasons why, everyone, not everything's ever going to be in the control of a management team, and you have to operate accordingly. Not to say that there aren't sometimes truly, huge events that really throw it off, but it's got to be kind of balanced with just the need to prepare for the unexpected.
Thank you for the comments. I would say I'm going to point to one thing that you said, Director Larson, that it should have been predetermined, and it was not in this case. And so I do believe it's a little late to have this conversation. However, I'm going to document it because while we go into the next few months where we're discussing goals and setting of goals for the following year, we need to consider that as part of that goal-making process so that there is clarity around what is expected and how it is to be reviewed going forward. It's my recommendation, and the vice chair may disagree with me, I don't know, but it's my recommendation that we do keep this as simple as possible and we follow the rubrics that we have already established for the goal review process, the short-term goal review process in the form that we have available to us. And so I'm listening to what you are saying. It is important, but I also think that fairly, that was not included in the original discussion we had around these goals. And the goal was pretty clear when it was approved by the entire body. And so the best heads or tails I'm able to make of it at this point is that based on what information I had that were hard numbers, i.e. the point values that were assigned to each of the sections and how we split the values from the core job function. I'm just working within that framework. That's all I'm trying to do at this point and make sure that we move it forward just a little bit. Vice Chair Guchenritter.
Thank you, Chair Guzman. Yeah, I agree with what you've stated. Again, Director Larson, respect your point of view and appreciate you sharing that. I stated my own point of view, and I think we've heard from everyone on this call their point of view. And I mean, if to put this to bed, I don't know if this we're able to, but I mean, is that something we could just vote on? At the end of the day, I think whatever the majority of this committee thinks is the right approach, let's go with that. And I'm confident it's kind of what we've already stated, the simple approach. But I'll pause there.
I would say we don't need to necessarily take a vote. This is just a discussion item to receive feedback at this point. Director Larson, I'd love to engage with you further about this so that I can make some very clear recommendations in the notes that I'm keeping on this process for upcoming discussions regarding goal setting and review process for next year. The intent right now is to get us through this year based on what we have approved, but also to keep a record of how we have made any adjustments to these tools and within the performance framework so that there is a clear guide on how to proceed following this. And I say that in that manner because this is the second time only that we have used this process. Gentlemen, please lower your hands for just a moment. The flipping back and forth is making me nauseous. Director Nicholson, please lower your hand. Thank you. The process needs to be adjusted per the contract. That contract would change with another general manager and CEO being contracted, or could potentially change at the extension or recreation of a new contract with the current general manager CEO. Either way, we need to have a process where we're not recreating the evaluation method and the performance cycle every single year. We have established a foundational process. We just need to figure out how to adjust it. Now, there is no guideline for this. There's no map for me to follow. I am simply taking my best first crack at it as the leader of this committee, and I'm looking to all of you for feedback. I want to make it as simple as possible for everybody to understand. And I think what you're saying is very important. So I do want to get clarification from you, Director Larson, later. But I will follow up with you offline about that so I can better understand some of what you're saying. That way we can include it maybe in the June retreat when we are facilitating a conversation regarding the next year's goal setting process. What I don't want to do and what I would like to avoid at all cost is any attempt to change goalposts and change parameters at this point, because we are 5 months in, which is more because we actually set some of these goals back to September of last year or October of last year. And we're more than halfway through the review period. And so we need to be clear on how to proceed. And I'm looking to you all for consensus and advice on how to do that. What you have said is important. I just want to make sure that we move forward with this and that everybody has clarity around it. All right, one more comment, and then I have some other matters to discuss with this.
Yeah,
ahead,
I just
Director
I think I'm the only one with my hand up right now. One thing that I think would help with this process at every stage of the game, but including right now, is to find out where we are at this point on each of these short-term goals. You know, in other words, if the goal is 96% for whatever period it was, where are we at through, as of right now, from the starting point to where we are right now, and then also to get a forecast from management as to where they think where we're going to finish the year on these goals. Because I think that I agree we don't want to change the goalposts, but as we think about how we might or how we would or how we could sort of set point allocations with the amount of time that's left in the year, knowing where we are right now and the likely achievability of any of these short-term goals would be, I think, really important to making that judgment. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Nicholson, you are recognized.
I appreciate it. I would just add that, to quote former Vice President Harris, we exist in the context of all that's happening around us, and to the point about, evaluating, even private companies, sometimes a company can perform terribly, but because the market does very, very well, the stock goes up regardless. And the reverse is true. Sometimes a company performs extremely well, and because the market tanks, the stock goes down. I think, in an era where we look at, how other transit agencies are performing in terms of, service recovery, in terms of service reliability, in terms of safety, it absolutely behooves us to recognize that, our framework for thinking about these types of questions may very well be different in October, November than it was in January, and giving ourselves the ability to reevaluate in that way is extremely reasonable from where I sit. And I would also just come back to our ability to agree right now on a hard framework in terms of numbers. I don't know that that's any more valuable than our ability in October to say, we're going to have a discussion. We are going to look at what we think is reasonable. We may not take an actual vote then on a rubric, but I think that we will come to some form of consensus over what is a reasonable way to evaluate these numbers and sort of, you know, to have sort of an informal understanding at that point. So I'm not certain. I wouldn't say necessarily that that process is entirely, you know, subjective, whereas coming up with a rubric now would be, you know, objective. I think there's measures of there, you know, there's degrees of that. So I just would caution us from thinking that, you know, a more consensus-based process in October leaves us, you know, completely out in the wilderness in coming up with an understanding of what these numbers mean.
Thank you, Director Nicholson. I also thank you for the reference back to former Vice President Harris, because I don't think anybody's falling out of any coconut trees today. So let's just make sure we keep moving forward. We definitely have data and statistics available publicly and internally. The good news, Director Larson, is that our one of our upcoming meetings is going to revolve directly around performance information, the feedback from the customer surveys and the employee surveys, where we'll be doing the deep dive into our customer experience and customer value initiatives. And so there's probably some room to talk about some statistics there that will matter and be relevant at this point. Also, the next meeting of the committee is our quarterly check-in with the general manager and CEO. And I believe the intent that CEO Johnson and I discussed was to be able to discuss exactly what you have asked for, where we are at with current goals, and what information is supposed to be brought up, which is why we split them apart. Good information, but bulky and heavy. And we want to make sure that we dedicate the time to meeting with our general manager, CEO, to do that check-in properly on the goal setting process halfway through the year. And then later turn and pivot to the deep dive on the customer experience surveys and the employee surveys, which matter a great deal to our agency and inform our review process going forward. So that's definitely been a concern. Part of why I'm bringing this forward now instead of doing this next month is because we need to begin a set of processes. So in that situation, I'm so sorry, Director Nicholson, did you have something further to add? Okay. Along with this process, so this is multifaceted. There are a couple of other things I would like you to know that are upcoming. And here we go. So have your note-taking pens ready, y'all. I'm open to receiving feedback. I know Vice Chair Guchenritter is. Anything that you think of post this meeting, please email both of us and let us know. I'm happy to share what I received directly with Vice Chair Guchenritter, and he shares with me as well. I will follow up with you, Director Larson, on your comments and concerns about the goal setting process to make sure that pre-work is done before we get to this point next year. Updating this, as you can see, I certainly tried to keep in line with what the point distribution and allocations were from last year based on what we were told this year, and then broke down with the advice of Vice Chair Guchenritter each of these goals at a 12.5% or 12.5 point allocation, just to keep it simple. The recommendation from RKL was that you evaluate each portion of a goal that has subparts on its own merit, and then combine that score to achieve the 12.5. So as you can see, the first goal has 4 distinct parts that we are measuring. I would also like to point out that some of those numbers are lagging indicators, which means we may not have, at the time we look at this for the first time and start doing the review process, the necessary data. And so we might need to consider the time frame in which we are doing the review, but that will come later in the process with very clear instructions and fully fleshed out numbers when they're available. Oftentimes, and Madam CEO, please correct me if I'm wrong, it's a 1 month to 2 month lag before we have some of the ridership or the boarding numbers and alignment numbers. When they have been verified, we have what are raw numbers, but they haven't necessarily gone through the process of cleaning up data and doing all of that. And so, you know, let's say we do this process beginning in September, we won't have September numbers likely until November. So when do we want to actually put the the marking there, right? And so to your point, Director Larson, those numbers are going to matter a great deal, and we have to have a conversation about the timeline and not throwing everything out right at the last minute like a rugby team chasing a ball. Madam CEO.
Thank you very much, Committee Chair Guzman. Just a point of clarification, recognizing 50% of our service is contracted out, we're receiving data from vendors, not just cleaning up the data. So I just wanted to ensure that I put that on the record so everybody understood. Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification. Just something to keep in mind for everybody's sake. All right. Also with this, we don't want any confusion with what the alignment, again, to Director Larson's keen insight on this, there is a clear alignment from point value to percentage increase that was agreed upon in the contract. And so the adjusted base salary and the point alignment, and I will give the heads up to our CPO Pelegi. I'm gonna pivot to you in just a moment. We are working together to ensure that we have a clear alignment ahead of time so that there are no surprises on what that looks like later, and no post evaluation determination would need to be made. We will have a clear understanding of what point value equals what percentage increase. And we're going to work on that process and ensure that we have those documents available for the transparency question and purpose so that there is no confusion later. CPO Pelegi, do you want to speak to that process a little bit? And then we don't have the document ready, but we will provide that when it is complete.
Thank you, Chair Guzman. Charlene Pelegi, Chief People Officer. If I may just point of clarification, just want to ensure, are we speaking of the form or are we speaking of the assessment, the calculating, or both?
So right now the assessment, the total points to percentage of adjusted base salary that we had previously discussed, so that we don't have any surprises later or any confusion about rounding up or rounding down. We have a process defined within the agency on how this is done, and we're going to create that output beforehand, so we know what we're doing.
Yes, thank you for the clarification. Yes, so we being our director of total rewards, we need to do the same process, although this one will be slightly modified for the GM and CEO specific to the criteria and the points as outlined. We do a similar process for all of our non-represented employees who, when their performance is assessed, then there is a correlation that equates into a percentage increase. It's not identical to the GM and CEO, certainly, but we will work together under the committee chair and vice chair's direction to create a form that then would be available and transparent and reviewed to ensure that all the calculations make sense, that everyone is in alignment, so that there's full transparency, including for the GM and CEO, to see how all that information comes together. So we will build that out, and it would then come forward for approval, and that would be the final document that gets used to calculate everything, so it's completely clear and transparent at the end of the year once performance has been assessed.
Great, thank you. Stay with me for just a moment. So I made reference earlier to RKL as a third party doing this process last year. The form was created in a system called I always get it wrong, Qualtrics. I have a hard time saying that, sorry y'all. They will not be performing the function of distributing or receiving that information. And so both Vice Chair Guchiner and I are confident in our subject matter experts internally, but as a matter of good governance, we will both keep an eye on this process very closely, and I will invite the chair of the board to also have visibility into this process to ensure that no funny business is going to happen anyway, because these are professionals, but good governance requires that we monitor the process as it goes forward. So the three of us will have insight to that. Where RKL did that separately last year and reported back, we will be doing this as an internal process. And so CPO Pelegi, would you please speak to the good news that we found out about Qualtrics and not having to do another form a different way.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So we, RTD also has a license with Qualtrics. And so we will take the form as in its current approved state, and we will build it into Qualtrics. So that is, again, sitting in a third-party system, if you will, a SaaS solution. We will build the survey. We're going to try to have it have the same look and feel, if you would, from last year to have consistency. But regardless of its look, all the questions will be identical. It will be locked down in Qualtrics. And for anyone who's familiar, you know, there's a trail, if you would, whatever happens within systems like that. And so once it's approved through the performance committee and the chair, and as you said, vice chair and the chair of the board have had a chance to look at it, that will be the standardized tool. Then it will be communicated out to all the directors to complete, as was last year. And then the tool itself will tabulate the results.
So in order to complete that work, looking at these initial questions, the point valuations, et cetera, are an important step to getting there. And so that's why I'm bringing this before all of you now, so that we can have some conversation. If anybody caught a mathematical error or had any questions that I could clarify at this point, I would like to deal with that on a very logistical level, just so that that work might begin, and then we can take further steps forward. I'm not trying to do an end zone run on this. I'm trying to do it in steps that make sense and build a logical progression, but putting it out before the members of this body, this committee, and then the board certainly help at the end of the year for understanding, and the complexity of what we're trying to do doesn't get any easier when we have to do our individual assessments. One note of reference in the RKL presentation, you will see references to a 360 review. We did not choose to follow that option this year. That was in agreement with our general manager CEO that it was unnecessary to do it at this juncture. So we are going to simply be worried about and focus on the board of directors performance evaluation survey that we need to update for the current performance period. Any questions about that? I see none. Okay. Like I said, any other questions, please email me, email Vice Chair Guchenritter. We will share with each other anything that we receive, and we will proceed forward. I get the sense that things are okay, but I take great note of concerns about how to evaluate. Are there any other matters to discuss? And I froze again.
Director Guzman, do we have you?
I can still see you, Michael.
Okay.
So you're okay.
Sorry. I know that we've got an extra person in our house using internet, so it's affecting us right now. I did not see any hands raised. Quick double check. There's no other matters to discuss. Going once, going twice. Okay, thank you. I appreciate all of the conversation, input, and feedback. The next meeting date of the Performance Committee will be June 2nd of 2025. We will have two distinct meetings in June for the Performance Committee. The second will be our quarterly check-in with the General Manager CEO. We look forward to an update on short-term goals and any other relevant matters that you would like to bring to us. That will be held in executive session with the directors, so we can have a robust conversation regarding personnel matters. And then the following meeting will be Monday, June 23rd. We will be doing a deep dive into the data for the surveys. That is in specific regard to the strategic initiatives of customer value and customer experience, as well as employee ownership. And we will be receiving information regarding those three surveys. I believe it's all of the modes that should be prepared by that point. Is that correct, General Manager or Mr. McKay? I'm not sure. I don't want to speak out of turn on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The intent is to have the employee survey data ready for the first meeting in June, and then the latter meeting will have both the rail and bus, and also paratransit and community value surveys as well.
Okay, so we might have just a little bit of time dedicated to employee feedback survey the second, and then the other two will be in June. Okay. I would like to advise everybody that is here and present that we want to reserve the majority of the June 2nd meeting for the general manager CEO's quarterly check-in, but certainly are not going to turn away any updated information regarding our employees. That's also important for us to hear in this committee. Thank you so much. We don't have any other matters to discuss, so seeing no other hands raised, thank you very much for a good conversation. I am going to call the meeting adjourned at 9:30.